Rod Jackson used to be the Progressive Conservative MPP for Barrie, but in last June's election campaign, he and his fellow Tories not only had to fight Liberals and New Democrats and Greens, but more than a dozen public sector unions as well. Jackson lost and attributes that to an unlevel playing field he says is threatening our democracy. Let's find out more from Rod Jackson, who's now the president of Inside Politics International, and it's good to have you on the agenda again.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Let's just start. Sheldon, would you mind putting that super up so we can show the name of Rod's new company? Here it comes. Inside Politics, T-I-C-K-S, International. Why are you spelling politics that way?
Well, we like to do things a little bit differently, and it looks good, and it sets us apart from everybody else, and that's our value proposition. So it really kind of outlines how we do things just a little bit differently.
Gotcha. Okay. Because
it looks cool.
We would have. It looks cool too. Okay. Yeah. We would have put that up, and somebody would have said you're misspelling the word, but no, that is how you spell it. Before we talk about your research, just a bit of background here. You ran for the first time as a provincial member in 2011.
Correct. Yep.
You won by pretty good margin.
2,700 votes, right in there.
Okay. Then you ran for re-election back in June.
Yeah.
What'd you lose by?
About the same.
You lost by about as much as you won by.
Correct. Yeah.
What do you think happened?
Well, you know, there's a lot of factors. I mean, partly it was some tragically bad policy on the campaign trail from our party, and some communications problems that surrounded that. But in large part, that was exploited by a massive amount of spending, unlimited spending, and unregulated spending by third parties.
That's what we want to get into. Third parties such as whom?
Well, the big one is the Working Families Coalition, right, which is a conglomerate of several different unions. But there's also individual actors that came out to play as well. I mean, among them, different associations. One of the interesting ones is the OPPA, the Ontario Provincial Police Association, which traditionally over 60 years hasn't been involved in politics at all in Ontario, or even in Canada, really. So to see them step up and get involved really starts to tell a tale about the lack of regulation for third-party players in elections in Ontario, specifically at a time when political parties are heavily regulated as to what they can raise, spend.
Let's point out that distinction, that it is true that you as a politician can only ask individuals in your riding for X number of dollars and over so many years and so on and so forth. What kind of regulations are in place to to sort of oversee what these third-party players can do?
Very little. In Ontario, there's very little. So, when we just really started to dig into it, you find that they have to register and they have to report what they spent. That's about it. As a political party and as a candidate, you have to say who you got your money from, how much they gave you, what you spent your money on, and account for it right down to the penny. And you can only raise, or you can raise as much as you want, but you can only spend a cap depending on what your population in your riding is, right? So you're really capped, no matter how much money you raise, you're only capped to what you can spend. And when you're up against, different third parties, and I don't want to single out unions because it means all of them. I mean, it could mean any third party outside of a political party can raise whatever they want and spend whatever they want. It's really, really hard. In my case, for example, and I'm not alone, we had a $25,000 advertising budget. We were up against what we figure is about a $2 million advertising campaign that came out against us in our region.
$2 million in your Simcoe County region?
In Simcoe County, yeah. When you add together all the ad buys for TV, radio, full-page newspaper ads, I mean, it almost outnumbered us on the radio 10-1. And we were spending the maximum we were allowed to spend. We just couldn't get our message out. We couldn't get out there and tell people what we were really talking about.
Having said that, I mean, I saw a lot of these third-party ads, obviously, and none of them actually said, vote Kathleen Wynne, right?
No, most of them didn't. No, that's correct. Yeah. But, it's also an exercise in opposites, right? So what other alternative was there? I mean, they came out clearly against us. In some cases, personally against the candidates in local ridings. But specifically against Tim and against our party.
Tim Hudak.
Yeah, Tim Hudak. Mm-hmm. Clearly they're driving, and by their own admission, Buzz Hargrove even passed the 2007 election and said, what we want to do is do everything we can to avoid a PC government getting elected. This is clearly their goal, and it's fine and dandy. It's not against the law. I mean, that's been proven. Our party's tried to take it to court, and that's the problem, is that it's not against the law to do those things. And what you have, I think, is a restriction on freedom of expression. So a lot of people say, well, it gives us our freedom of expression to be able to spend this money and say what we think and talk about the ideas that are important to our members, assuming their members feel that way. We don't know that for sure. But at the same time, we're not allowed to do that. We can't spend that sort of money. And we're restricted. Our freedom of expression as a political party, the people who are actually looking to govern Ontario, was severely restricted compared to what we were up against.
So why didn't you go out there and find a similar third-party group that would be prepared to spend millions of dollars on your behalf?
Well, here's the interesting rub, is that we could, right? I mean, and believe me, we tried. You go out there and you look for that. It wasn't there, obviously, and that's partly to play because of your policies and where you're headed. But at the same time, the unions came out and they were very, and other third-party groups, associations, and even in some cases NGOs came out, and were talking about what was important to them, and they drowned out the voices of everybody else because they could spend tons of money. Now this could turn around, right? And this is kind of my argument where it's not really sour grapes, because I think this candidate has been turned around where it benefits the Conservative Party. I mean, if we go back to the time of before the spending rules were changed federally in 1974. You go back to the 1960s where, the Liberal government at the time thought, geez, this is absurd where we have all this money being spent by corporations in donations to political parties. It's totally uneven. We can't get our voice out. So it took 10 years to come up with legislation, the 1974 Act, that actually limited what parties could raise and spend. And then they started to realize through a period of time that it was being subverted by all these parties then just kind of essentially third parties sponsoring political parties. And it got limited again by the Conservative Party under Harper to say, okay, not only are we going to restrict what unions and corporations and individuals can spend, but we're actually going to say no. Corporations and unions can't donate to political parties at all. Only individuals can.
Jean Chrétien did that.
Yeah. Well, and then Harper took it to the next level, right? Chrétien actually limited to what amount they could donate. Harper took away spending by corporations and unions. You find me a conservative who's happy that a corporation can donate to their campaign. So it's gone both ways. And what we're seeing is that, and it just happens in the last, 3 elections or so, where it's gone against, what my party has stood for. But at the same time, this could turn around very quickly and act, against any other political party, whether it's the NDP or the Liberals. The point is, it's not an equal egalitarian system. We started down that path where we were limiting what parties could spend. But we've only gone halfway because we haven't limited what other third parties can spend in an election to see the results they want.
What do you think we should do about it?
It's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of things we can do, right? We can go back to the Libertarian Model, like the Americans have, where political parties and third parties can raise and spend whatever they please. That's what they do in the States. They have super PACs down there. They raise and spend whatever they want. We've decided as a society or as a political entity in Canada, that's not the direction we want to go. We want to make sure it's more egalitarian, right? That groups have more equal access to, not equal access to money. I mean, who's to say that, even if there's limits, that these third parties can raise those limits? The point is that everyone has an equal opportunity to hit that limit. So that right now, political parties are limited to what they can spend, and the third parties aren't. So let's at least make an equal playing field so that everybody can get their voice heard, and no one party gets their voice drowned out, whether it's an NGO getting drowned out or whether it's another special interest that can't get a word in edgewise.
No, I get this unlevel playing field, and I know conservatives have often said to me, this is not fair. Unions go out, they spend all this money, they defeat our candidates, and then they're in negotiations with the provincial government who feel indebted to them because they spend so much on their behalf, therefore they're going to get what they want. But unions will simply say the same thing about business as well. The business will go out there and spend a ton of money to get a pro-business party in, and the pro-business party will cut their taxes and they'll get what they want. Right. So how is this an unlevel playing field in that regard?
Well, it's not happening. And they're right. They can go out and do that. And the point is here is that that's not right either. We need to make sure that there's an equal playing field so that when corporations, just if a group of corporations or a group of interests, could be any interest, decide they want to support another party, whether it's the NDP or the Conservative Party or the Green Party, have the same set of rules as each one of those parties and as, say the Working Family Coalition does. Let's have an equal playing field. We started down this road and we actually got to a point where it's only half measures, right? I don't think anyone foresaw what would happen, and that the Working Families Coalition would be as effective as they've been with their organization. They have, and kudos to them. They've done a great job at getting their message across.
You don't mean kudos to them. You're mad at them.
Well, hey, I respect what they've done. I respect what they've done, in so much as they've played within the rules, and they've been very effective at getting their message out. The fact is, it's almost insurmountable, and they've got to a point where they're almost, it starts to almost beg collusion with the Liberal Party. I mean, now to the point where the Liberal Party depends so much, I think, on that relationship with them and the Working Families Coalition, that, you know, at what point does it become, you know, they're in collusion with one another, or even begs corruption. I'm not suggesting they are corrupt, but, you know, it begs that, you know, to happen. It opens that door because, geez, they don't want to lose that support, right?
The last Conservative who accused a Liberal of corruption ended up getting sued. I think Kathleen Wynne is still suing Tim Hudak for that one.
Yeah.
So you're not alleging corruption.
No, I'm not alleging corruption.
Okay.
I'm just saying it opens the door for things like corruption and collusion between political parties and third parties.
I can still, Rod, I hear what you're saying, but I can still see people at home watching this saying, you know what, if he'd managed to get a similarly large number of third-party actors involved on behalf of his campaign instead of in opposition to his campaign, and he'd ended up winning, he'd have thought that was just ducky.
It doesn't make it right. I mean, would I like to have won? Sure, but that's not the point. The point is that it's not a fair playing field. And, you know, we started down this path of traditional egalitarianism in Canada, where the federal government, you know, even it was challenged. Even I think it was Harper v. Canada, where Harper wanted to limit what third parties could spend in a campaign. It was shot down by the Supreme Court, and then actually then upheld again because there's a reference in the Charter of Freedoms of balance, to make sure there's a balance there. So if you're going to limit one party, i.e. a political party, you have to impose the same limits on any other third party, whether it's a corporation or a union.
Should there be rules saying if you're a member of the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, you can only spend on an election campaign what the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario spends as well?
I think that's a great place to start, sure.
What's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Why not? We have limitations, and we have to be accountable to the voting public, and they have to know exactly where our money's coming from and how much of it is spent where. Why shouldn't other parties who have political interest have the same rules?
Okay, but if you're also right that we have potentially here an unhealthy situation in Ontario where unions have helped get the government elected, the government now has a majority, they will be there for 4 years, how is it possibly in their interest to, in some respects, unilaterally disarm by giving you the even playing field that you want?
Yeah, that's the problem we run into, right? Why would they shoot themselves in the foot? I mean, they've benefited very heavily from this, which is part of the reason I wrote this paper with my co-author, Jane Kvarkova, on exactly why this isn't right. And when you start to look at other provinces, i.e. Manitoba, Alberta, BC, Quebec, I think Nova Scotia, and some other jurisdictions with Westminster systems have actually imposed different types of limitations on third parties. The reason they've done this, and the reason the OECD has recommended that this sort of limitation happens, is to reduce the influence and to make sure that the pluralism of our system is equal. Everyone's on an equal playing field. It's important that these groups have a voice, that they have the freedom of expression, but it's important that they all have equal opportunity to express themselves and the same limits. The alternative is to give no one any limits and let everyone free for all. We know that doesn't work.
Political parties too.
Political parties
let
too.
Them spend whatever.
If you're going to let one party, a third party do it, let a political party do it too. That's the other. But we know that doesn't work, and that's why we started limiting what third parties, what political parties could spend, starting in the 1970s. We know it doesn't work. So you don't start halfway down and do half measures. You gotta go the full distance, I think.
I do wonder, though, notwithstanding the uneven playing field you've described, how many were you? Was it 19 public sector unions that were in opposition to the Conservative Party before the last election, who were spending money trying to make sure you guys didn't win? Something like 19,
yeah.
Maybe a dozen, whatever it was, whatever the number was.
It was, yeah, a significant number.
I can't help but think that if your leader hadn't promised to eliminate 100,000 jobs in your hometown, in Barrie.
The Barrie Doctrine, they call it. Yeah, I'm not proud of that. Yeah.
Which I think you told us once before, you got a heads up on the night before.
At 11 o'clock the night before.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can't help but think that we wouldn't even be having this conversation today if that very ill-advised policy plank weren't put forward.
Look, let's be clear, that played a huge role in that in the election. I think there's a certain element that was exploited. The massive spending was exploited. We allowed them to exploit it even more. We opened that door for them to really nail us hard. But I think also, you know what, Steve, they would have come at us anyway, no matter what. I mean, some of the things they were saying in their ads were not true. I mean, there was you know, blatantly saying we were going to fire nurses and police officers, when actually right in the paper, it actually, in the Million Jobs plan that we had, it actually specifically said they weren't going to.
In fairness, your leader accused the Premier of being corrupt, and nobody has seen any of the so-called facts that were backing. Anyway, we're getting into a different subject here. Tell me this in our last minute. What does it say, do you think, about the state of progressive conservatism in Ontario today, when Conservatives are calling for restrictions on freedom of expression, which is really not a very conservative thing to do?
I think we're actually looking at increasing the freedom of expression, not limiting it. And that's the crux of this argument, is that right now the freedom of expression of political parties, whether it be Liberal, Conservative, or NDP, is being restricted. So if we're going to have true freedom of expression, give everybody an equal playing field to have their freedom of expression, and don't limit one party over another. So I'm actually advocating for freedom of expression, not limiting it. In fact, quite the opposite.
Rod, good of you to join us on TVO tonight. Thanks so much. That's Rod Jackson, now the president of Inside Politics International, formerly the MPP for Barrie. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.